This is Bluebook Digital SAT number 10, Math Module 2. An airplane descends from an altitude of 9,500 feet to 5,000 feet at a constant rate of 400 feet per minute. What type of function best models the relationship between the descending airplane's altitude and time? Well, if you're coming downward at a constant rate of whatever, then by definition, that's decreasing linear. Line K is defined by that. Line J is parallel to line K in the xy plane. What is the slope of line J? Well, parallel lines have the same slope, which is simply 17/7. Caleb used juice to make popsicles. The function that approximates the volume in fluid ounces of juice Caleb had remaining after X popsicles. Which statement is the best interpretation of the y-intercept of the graph of that in the xy plane? Well, if you wanted to make a simple sketch of this, and let's use the units that they recommend. I'm going to try to move this out of the way for the purpose of drawing the picture. It would be juice remaining as the y-axis and number of popsicles. Now bear in mind, it's the juice remaining. So you have a y-intercept of 0, 30, right? Because when you put in 0 for x, you get 30 for y. And it's coming downwards like this. The downward slope is -5. And if you wanted to, you could solve for when it comes out to be 0, like this and this and this. So after 6 popsicles, this would be no remaining juice. But the meaning of the y-intercept is effectively the starting point. So I would say it's in the beginning, 30 units, right? 30 fluid ounces remain when he began to make the popsicles. A physics class is planning an experiment about a toy rocket. The equation that gives the estimated height, y, and feet of a toy rocket x seconds after it is launched into the air. Which of the following is the best interpretation of the vertex of the graph of the equation in the xy plane? The vertex of the graph. If you understand graphical transformations, you can probably just look at it and say the answer. So if you understand in general that when you're looking at something in the form x minus h squared plus k, that has vertex h comma k. Now, even if you don't know that, you can get Desmos to help you very, very effectively here. So let's put in this whole thing. -16 times the quantity x minus 5.6 all squared plus 502. And let me see the picture a little bit better. The vertex. Well, it's kind of hard to see unless you adjust the relationship of the units of the window. So I'm going to make the x-axis go from simply 0 to 10. It seems that that would encapsulate the vertex just glancing at it. Sure. So you have the vertex at 5.6 comma 502, which is of course the h comma k coordinate pair respectively that we drew a minute ago right here. So when the time is 5.6, it reaches a maximum height of 502. Estimated height, a max height of 502 feet, 16 seconds after it's launched, sure. Or I'm sorry, 5.6 seconds after it is launched, which is B as in boy. Function f is defined as that, where k is a constant and f of 5 equals 32. Well, whenever it gives you an equation and also a point that happens to be on the equation, they want you to plug that in to get more information. So if f of x is 4x times k times the 4x plus k times the quantity x minus 1, and it contains the pair 5, 32. As in when you put in 5 as x, you get 32 as the answer. So 32 is the output when you do this and this. So 32 is 20 plus 4k. So k is 3, but of course now you're not done. Now you've determined that the general function is 4x plus 3 times quantity x minus 1. And then f of 10 means that you're putting in 10 as x. So this is this, which is 40 plus 27 should be 67. Triangles ABC and DEF are congruent, as in the same triangle. A corresponds to D, B to E, and B and E are right angles, okay? So always make sure to draw the picture accurately as described. So I'm going to say A, B, C, and then D, E, F, where B is in boy and E is in elephant are right angles. The measure of A is 18 degrees. What is the measure of angle F? So if this is an 18, of course it has to be 18 plus 90 plus the unknown down here, adding up to 180. So this is a 72. And then of course if these are congruent, then F as in Frank is the same as C as in cat, which is just 72. This is an excellent problem with which Desmos will help. In fact, making a graph of a system of inequalities is one of the most obvious applications once you've done it of the features available in Desmos. So y is less than or equal to x plus 7, and also y is greater than or equal to negative 2x minus 1. Now you have to understand what this means. The overlap of the colors, so the purple color and the green color both being true, represents the solution space to this. So the answer is in this wedge down in here, which I'm going to guess is only one answer. Sure, it must be 14 comma 0 because that's obviously on the x-axis is in this wedge pocket. It's asking about median and standard deviation. This is kind of a conceptual question, so just glancing at them, you can tell that both of the data sets are symmetric. They both obviously are symmetric about 13 because it's a perfect reflection to the left and the right of 13. So no matter what the numbers are, if it's symmetric about 13, then they both have median 13. So you know that number 1 is true. Now, what is the definition of standard deviation? I always tell my students it's how spread apart the data are. That's all you really have to understand for standard deviation is how spread out are the data. So if you have a data set where a number is further to the right or left of the median, then it's effectively more spread out. I think you can see what they've effectively done is when you go from A to B, these two where my cursor are have effectively moved to the edge parts, and the other elements all remain the same, right? So what's on 11, 12, 14, and 15 stays the same, but the two top dots on the 13 got moved to the 10 and the 16, which means that data set B is more spread out, as in has a higher standard deviation. So which of the following statements must be true? The median of data set A is equal to yes. The standard deviation of data set A is equal to no, right? The standard deviation of data set B is higher, so the answer is 1 only. A scientist initially measures 12,000 bacteria in a growth medium. 4 hours later, the scientist measures 24,000 bacteria. Assuming exponential growth, the formula that gives the number of bacteria in the growth medium where R and C are constants and P is the number of bacteria T hours after the initial measurement. What is the value of R? So this is effectively an equation and points that satisfy the equation to solve for an unknown. You're saying you end up with 24,000 bacteria, having started with 12,000 bacteria, and this is 2 to the, now 4 is T, so this is R times 4. Clearly both sides are divisible by 12,000, so this collapses all the way to this, and then of course it's simply 1 is 4R, so R is a fourth. A cube has that volume. What is the surface area in square units of a cube? So to go from the volume of a cube back to the edge length of the cube, it's simply the cube root. In fact, that's where the word cube root effectively comes from, right? 474,552 cube root, which I think it's helpful to write as to the 1/3 power, is 78. Now, what is the surface area of a cube? It's 6 square faces, and the area of each face is the edge of the cube to the 2nd power because it's a square. So effectively, it's 6 of 78 to the 2nd power. That is the answer, 36,504. Solution to the given system is xy. What is the value of 8x plus 7y? Well, as we saw in the first module with a system of equations question like this, it's often set up so that if you simply add on top of each other or subtract, it collapses to be something simple. And it looks like that is indeed the case here also, because what's in the left-hand column are opposites to begin with. So if you simply add, you're looking at this being 24, which is to say that this is 3, so y itself is 3/7. Okay? Then you could take that factoid and plug it back into any of the equations to get a true statement for x. So let's see, if we plug it into the top, you're looking at 16x plus 4 times 7 times 3/7 equaling 12. The numbers, there probably was a more clever way to do this, but let's not beat ourselves up about that. 7 times 3/7 is 3, which gets you to here. Interesting, which gets you to x being 0. So this actually collapses to something very simple. So 8x plus 7y is simply 8 times 0 plus 7 times 3/7 is 3. Certain town has an area of 4.3 square miles. What is the area in square yards? Square yards of this town. Okay, so what is a square mile? If this is 1 square mile, it's a square whose edge is 1,760 yards. So it's 1760 by 1760, as in the area is, I'm going to write it out the long way just to prove the point. It's this times this, but these are both in yards, which is why the area is in yards squared, whatever that product is. 3,097,600 yards times yards is square yards, yards squared. So every square mile is 3,097,600 square yards. Now you set up a proportion. 1 square mile is to 3,097,600 square yards, as 4.36 square miles is to x square yards. And the answer will be the cross multiplied. So if I have the number 3,097,600 on the screen, I simply cross multiply, so it's times 4.36 is that, it's that big number on the bottom, which surprises people at first, but that's how square variation works. Triangles PQR and LMN are graphed in the XY plane. Triangle PQR has vertices PQ and R at, okay, I'm going to draw this the long way because the questions are getting harder now that we're on the second math section and we got a perfect score on the first math section. So we're getting into the really advanced question section. Okay, P is at 4, 5. Q is 4, 7. And R is 6, 5. P, Q, R. So it's a right triangle, right? Because obviously 4, 7 is directly above 4, 5, and 6, 5 is directly right of 4, 5. So it's a vertical line segment, a horizontal line segment makes this a right angle. And this is actually a 2 and a 2, so it's actually a right isosceles, so this would be 2 radical 2. LMN has vertices LMN at 4, 5. So again, this repeats. So L has this one in common. This is also L, right? So P, yeah, so P is L. Okay, I know my picture's not perfect. M is 4 comma 7 plus K. Okay, so here's M as in Mary at 4 comma 7 plus K. Okay. And then N is at 6 plus K comma 5. K is a positive constant. If the measure of angle Q is t degrees, what is the measure of angle N? 6 plus K comma 5. So what's happening here is the K value, the extra offset, is equivalent on both sides of the triangle, because from 4.5 to 4.7 is, so you're basically going K units beyond upward right here. From 7 to 7 plus K, it's an extra K units. And yeah, similarly from 6 to 6 plus K is an extra K units. So if you wanted to say the dimensions of the green triangle that gets created, it's 2 plus K and 2 plus K and a right angle. So it's still a right isosceles. It's still a 45, 45, 90. And if you really wanted to, you could say that this would have length 2 plus K times radical 2. Now, if Q is 40, well, we know that Q is 45 degrees. Then N is in Nancy. Well, these are all 45s. This is a 45. So the answer is 45. Isn't that simply 90 minus t degrees? Sure. Is 90 minus 45 is 45. Is C as in cat. Small business owner budgets $2,200 to purchase candles. The owner must purchase a minimum of 200 candles. This looks like it's going to be a system. The owner pays $4.90 per candle to purchase small candles and $11.60 per candle to purchase large candles. What is the maximum number of large candles the owner can purchase to stay within the budget? Okay, so if I say, I'm going to say S is number small and L is number large. Must purchase a minimum of 200 candles. So it begins with, in fact, now that I think about it, I should use X and Y instead, because we're going to end up using Desmos for this. So for clarity's sake, X and Y, it's X plus Y is greater than or equal to 200. And then separately, it's 4.9X plus 11.6Y is less than or equal to 2,200. You could solve this by hand, but you should be able to put this into Desmos and get its imaging to help you enormously in this case. Let's see if we can get that to work. Oh, sorry about that. Not really set up to do what I'm trying to do. Hang on just a moment. X plus Y is greater than or equal to 200. And then 4.9x plus 11.6y is less than or equal to 2,200. Okay, so we've created a system. Now, question is, you have to be in the solution space of both of these, which is, it looks like it's effectively crossing over in here. Yeah, you can tell that the crossover where the overlapping pocket begins is somewhere in here. I know it's really tricky to see, and it's honestly kind of designed to be tricky to see. Let's see if we can adjust the window effectively. So there's no such thing as negative candles. So I'm gonna have the x-axis go from just 0 to 20. See what just that does for us. Yeah, but then of course you want the number of candles together to be a minimum of 200. I'm just kind of guessing we could adjust the axis to, how about 0 to 300? and see how that works. Okay, so now you can tell that the overlap begins here. Now, will it tell you? Yes, it will tell you that x, so it's the pair 17.9, 182.1 effectively. So the corner in here is the y value being 182. So I believe what's happening is the maximum number of large candles, I believe it's 182 because that's effectively the integer that's at the edge of the overlap pocket. But let's see if we can now write this out. So let's just do a tiny bit of arithmetic right here. If it was 182 times 11.6, that would be 2,111. And then effectively the number of smalls would be the difference between 182 and 200, which is 18. So 18 times the 4.9, yes, would be underneath, right? You could also show why it's you could confirm that 182 is the answer by putting in the next available integer and seeing that you go over it. So 182 is the answer, but watch what happens if it was 183. Then even if this goes down to 17, yeah, you're still over 2,206. So a tricky question, you have to understand how to adjust the window for a system of inequalities, but Desmos does help you if you understand what you're doing. Okay, they're getting pretty tricky here. This is a classic special right triangle instance. In fact, I love these questions. These sort of transcend all place and time in mathematics. A square is inscribed in a circle. The radius of the circle is that. Okay, let's make a simple sketch. It always ends up being based on special right triangles for these. So the radius of the circle is 20 radical 2 over 2. Sure, and you could draw the radius as from here to here or here to here, but the helpful way to draw it is here to here. So then this triangle like this, because it's a square, it's a right isosceles triangle, is a 45, 45, 90. The diameter is simply double this, which is 20 radical 2. And then, of course, if you happen to not remember, you could look at the reference sheet here. So in a 45, 45, 90, the hypotenuse is radical 2 times the side length, which makes this actually really simple to jump back to this being 20 and this being 20. And then what's the question here? What is the side length? It's just 20. It's actually very straightforward. Which of the following equations represents a circle in the xy plane that intersects the y-axis at exactly 1 point? Well, even if you weren't sure about the rules of circles in general, you could just graph these one at a time on Desmos. In fact, let's do that. Quantity x minus 8 squared plus quantity y minus 8 squared equals 16. You can zoom out and see that that does not touch either axis, so it's not A. And let's just manipulate them one at a time. Changing this to a 4, well, that actually hits the x-axis at exactly 1 point, but not the y-axis. Then to make C as in cat, I change this to a 4 and this to a 9. Sure, that's the answer. It touches the y-axis at the point 0, 9. But just to be thorough, if you remove this, it touches the y-axis at 2 points. So it's C as in cat. One of the equations in a system of two linear equations is that the system has no solution. Which equation could be the second equation? Well, a system of two lines that has no solution means that the lines never cross, which means they must be parallel, which means the other line must have a slope of 6. Now, it's not written in slope-intercept form, but you can tell by quickly maneuvering it in your mind that the answer is A, because it would be y equals 6x plus 18 by just putting this on the other side. Okay, this is going to be, I'm going to zoom in. This is going to be based on factoring. So you can tell when you look at the original denominators that the denominator on the right has something to do with the denominator on the left. And it's a relatively straightforward thing that will create a situation where things can cancel out. Let me recopy, but I'm guessing it has to do with So if you factor what's on the bottom right, you factor the denominator of the right-hand fraction, you can pull out an xy. And then this becomes x minus 8. Of course, okay. Then to be able to add these, you technically have to have a common denominator, which is itself this denominator. And you get the left-hand fraction to be that by multiplying its numerator and denominator, both by xy. Now I'm going to jump to doing the actual distribution. So xy squared plus 12xy plus xy minus 8y equals this whole thing. Now glancing at the answer choices, yeah, they actually do the expansion. So let's see. I'm going to write it as, well, since it's this, sure, that simply becomes x squared y minus 8xy. And then if you clean up the top by combining like terms, sure, those two middle terms combine. Xy squared plus 13xy minus 8y over x squared y minus 8xy. Get that 13 on the top. It looks like it's C as in cat, just confirming. Yes. Given equation relates the positive variables p, q, r, and s, which of the following is equivalent to q? Well, you actually can solve this algebraically. It's just a really funky set of manipulation. Now that I think about it, it relates closely to the one that we just did in the last question. The common denominator of these fractions is simply the product of all four denominators. So in order to get what's on the left, it's 20 times the quantity QRS over P times the quantity QRS equals 20 times the quantity. It's basically every other letter as a triplet by which you multiply it. So this is PRS over Q times PRS minus 20 times PQS over R times PQS equals 20 times, a little sloppy here, but I'm going to write it up here, 20 times PQR over S times PQR. Let me write that a little bit neater on the next line. So now 20 QRS equals 20 PRS minus 20 PQS minus 20 PQR. And of course, all of these are over PQRS. I'm going to be thorough by recopying all of these denominators, but they effectively cancel out because it tells you that they're positive variables. So you don't have to worry about anything being zero, as in a divide by zero mistake. So technically, you're multiplying the entire equation, the entire expression by PQRS, and you're left with simply what's on top. So I'm going to write out the steps just to be thorough here. You're left with just the tops. And of course, you could divide everything by 20. So now you're looking at QRS is PRS minus PQS minus PQR. Now, if you want to solve for Q as in quicksand, you get the things with Q on one side and without the Q's on the other side. I'm going to put the things with Q's on the left. So QRS plus PQS plus PQR equals negative. Oh, sorry. Where did I mess that up? QRS plus PQS plus PQR equals PRS. Yep. And then you pull out the Q from everything. So it's Q times the quantity, RS plus PS plus PR is PRS. And then finally, Q by itself is PRS over this sum of three products. A funky question. Okay, the given equation k is an integer constant. If the equation has no real solution, what is the least possible value of k? There are a couple different ways to do this question. I'm going to first do it by writing out the algebra and conceiving of it as a parabola. So kx squared minus 56x equals negative 16. And of course, to make it a true quadratic, you set it equal to 0. Plus 16 equals 0. Now, for a parabola to have no real solution, it has to not touch the x-axis. The best way to do this is to understand that the discriminant, since the parabola has no real solutions, the quadratic has no real solutions, the discriminant must be negative. Let me write the quadratic formula the long way and show what that means. For there to be no real solutions, that means it has solutions that are complex conjugates. It has solutions that are non-real, solutions that are imaginary, that are complex, which is when this is negative. Because if what's in the radical is negative, then the solutions would have I in them. They would be complex. They'd be non-real. So no real solutions for a parabola is when the discriminant is negative, which is to say when b squared minus 4ac is less than 0, which in the context of this question would be negative 56 squared minus 4 times k times 16 is less than 0, which is 3,136 minus 64k is less than 0. I'm going to try to avoid jumping any steps here. So write this as less than 64k. I'm going to flip it to 64k is greater than 3136, which gives you k is greater than 49. Now, k is greater than 49, and it says in the question is an integer constant. So what's the least possible value of a? The answer is 50. Now, let's do it on Desmos also, which I think should have a really helpful means of going about evaluating this. X times the quantity kx minus 56 equals negative 16. I think, will it offer to have a slider? Oh no, I think if you, hang on. Does it? Yeah, it offers the slider if you put it in this form. So you kind of have to do the factoring. Yeah, do the distribution to get the slider. And I think it makes you, yeah, you have to put it on one side like this. Okay, if you can get it to there, then it'll offer you the slider. Now, yeah, you can see that this isn't enough. So you're going to have to expand the range of the slider. Now we know the answer is 50. So suppose I go to 100 as the max for the slider as a step of 1. Sure. And then, yeah, you can just see there. And if you're clever enough to zoom in very carefully, you can see that when it's, 48 gives you 2 solutions. 49 is exactly 1. So 50 is the lowest integer value for k, for which the vertex is above the axis, as in has no solution. Okay. Oh, this looks pretty tricky. Which of the following points lies on the graph of each equation in? Okay. Well, it looks like a system of equations, and I'm going to write and manipulate this the old-fashioned way by hand and see where I get first. So let me recopy 2x plus 3y being 7, 10x plus 15y being 35. But isn't that just, oh, that's just the same line, right? Because if you multiplied the top by 5, you would get exactly the same thing. So this is kind of a red herring. The two lines are exactly the same. So you're effectively just thinking about the line 10x plus 15y equals 35. Now your instinct is to put it in slope-intercept form. Let's see what happens if you do that and divide everything by 5 here. So now I'm looking at 3y is negative 2x plus 7. So y itself is negative 2/3 x plus 7/3. So like for any value r, if x was r, so you'd have r and y would be negative 2/3 r plus 7/3. So you're hoping there's an answer. I'm not sure if this is going to give you this as an answer. Is this an answer choice? Close, but no, right? It's because that's not C as in cat, and it's not D as in dog. So these are gone, but it looks like, it looks like what's happening is they actually want you to solve for X in terms of Y, which is kind of a bizarre way of writing it, but that must be what to do here. So from back up here, if I solve for X in terms of Y, in fact, I should, sure, I'm going to flip to 2x is negative 3y plus 7. So x itself is negative 3 halves y plus 7 halves. So if you put in, it spins your head around to say, but if r is y, then x is negative 3 halves r plus 7 halves, which means you have the xy pair, negative 3 halves r plus 7 halves, comma, r. That's a really tricky question. These are the last couple very advanced questions that you get at the end of the second math section, having gotten all of the first math section correct. What's the very last one going to be? Oh, yeah, it's one of these. Okay. Charges $220 for the first 2 hours of repair, plus an hourly fee for each additional hour. Total cost of 5 hours repair is $400. Which function f gives the total cost in dollars for x hours of repair where x is greater than or equal to 2? Well, a lot of people are accidentally inclined to say it's 220 plus something, but I'm guessing it's actually not that. 220 for the first 2 hours plus an hourly fee for each additional hour, which means it's actually 220 is the first 2 hours, then each additional hour, if you're getting to 5, is 3 times something. I'm going to call it, it's plus 3x is what gives you 400, right? That's first 2 hours and then 3 additional hours. This is 5 hours, gets you to 400. So now this becomes this, and this is this. You could still get this wrong though. So it's plus x hours for each additional hour. Now, the abstract way to do it is that it's 220 plus 60 times something. Like, for example, if the total number of hours of the job was 11, then the thing that goes in here would be a 9. Total number of hours of the job was 100, then in here would be a 98. So this is actually x minus 2. So it's 220 plus 60x minus 120 is 60x plus 100. Really tricky question.